A fun day at the water park turns into something no one expected. When a little girl faces danger, two famous heroes witness what no one else dares to stop. What would you do in this moment? Watch till the end and find out. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories. The sun hung high in the sky, scorching everything beneath it. Heat waves shimmered off the pavement as families streamed through the entrance of the massive water park, seeking refuge from the relentless summer heat. The air was thick with the scent of sunscreen, chlorine, and fried food. Children screamed with excitement as they raced from one slide to another, the sound of water splashing and lifeguard whistles creating a chaotic yet familiar summer symphony. Among the crowd, two men moved quietly, blending into the sea of visitors. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wore a plain black t-shirt, dark shorts, and sunglasses, his massive frame drawing a few glances but not much more. Beside him, John Cena, equally built and dressed down in a gray tank top and shorts, walked with easy confidence. It was rare for them to have a day off like this, free from cameras and fans. Today, they were just two regular guys enjoying a break, savoring a moment of normalcy. They strolled past the lazy river, nodding at the laughter of kids drifting by on their inflatable tubes. For a moment, everything felt right. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that today was going to be about peace and simplicity. Yet, not far from them, a story was already unfolding that would shatter the calm. In the center of the park, near one of the competition pools designed for experienced swimmers, a small black girl stood with her fists clenched. Her name was Layla, no older than 10, her dark skin glistening under the sun, her hair neatly braided. She wore a bright pink swimsuit and held herself with surprising pride for someone her age. Beside her, a tall, broad-shouldered lifeguard in a red uniform stood smirking. His name tag read Travis. Travis towered over Layla, holding a pink inflatable ring high above his head, just out of her reach. His smirk deepened as he looked down at the girl. "I paid for that," Layla snapped, her voice trembling but determined. "Oh yeah?" Travis sneered. "Are you sure about that? Maybe you snuck in, huh? I don't remember seeing you at the front gate." A few adults nearby chuckled nervously, glancing at each other but choosing not to get involved. Layla's eyes blazed with defiance. "I bought my ticket like everyone else," she insisted. Travis tilted his head, grinning wider. "Feisty, huh? Still, are you sure this pool's right for you, sweetheart? There's a kiddie pool over there. Looks more your speed." He pointed toward the splash zone where toddlers played under spraying fountains. Layla's lips quivered in frustration. "I'm not a baby," she fired back. "I swim better than you." The words earned a few stifled laughs from the small crowd that had begun to gather. Travis turned, playing to his audience. "You hear that? She thinks she belongs with the real swimmers." John and Dwayne, still at a distance, stopped mid-stride, their attention snapping to the scene. They watched silently as Layla stood her ground. Both men exchanged a look. There was something all too familiar about what they were seeing. Travis leaned down, his face inches from Layla's. "You know what? How about you prove it first?" Layla's fists clenched tighter, but she stood her ground. Without warning, Travis threw the pink inflatable ring into the deep end of the pool. It sailed through the air, landing with a loud splash and bobbing lazily on the surface. Layla gasped. "Why did you do that?" "You said you could swim. Go get it," Travis taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. John Cena's jaw tightened. Dwayne exhaled slowly, shaking his head. They had seen enough of this kind of power play in their lives, someone using their position to humiliate, to dominate. But still, they waited, watching, knowing too well how quickly a scene like this could escalate. Layla took a step forward, then another. Her mother, standing nearby, reached out, but stopped herself, fear and helplessness written all over her face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Around them, the crowd remained silent, eyes darting nervously. No one moved. No one spoke. "Go on," Travis sneered. "Let's see what you've got." John clenched his fists, ready to intervene, but Dwayne put a hand on his arm. "Wait," he muttered. "Let's see what she does." Layla stood at the edge of the pool, staring at the floating ring. The water shimmered, deceptively inviting. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, summoning all the courage her small body could muster, she leapt. The moment her feet left the ground, her mother screamed, "Layla, no!" Time seemed to slow. Layla hit the water with a splash and instantly began to sink. Travis crossed his arms, smirking. He made no move to help, no move to intervene. Layla kicked furiously, but something was wrong. She had jumped too far, her head hit the water hard, and she disoriented quickly. Panic set in fast as she struggled to find the surface. Her tiny hands clawed at the water, but every movement pulled her deeper. John Cena's eyes widened. "Dwayne," he growled. "I see her," Dwayne responded, but John was already moving. The pool was deep, far too deep for a child. Travis stood still, watching as Layla fought the water, his face devoid of concern. Dwayne stayed near Layla's mother, who was on the verge of collapsing. "Stay here," he whispered. "We've got her." John dove in without hesitation, cutting through the water like a bullet. He pushed himself deeper, eyes scanning until he found Layla sinking fast, limbs flailing weakly. She was losing the fight. With powerful strokes, John reached her, grabbing her around the waist and kicking hard toward the surface. She was barely conscious, eyes fluttering, water filling her mouth. Dwayne stayed ready at the edge, watching every second as John broke through the surface with Layla in his arms. "I've got her!" John roared, swimming quickly to the side. The crowd gasped. Layla's mother screamed her name, pushing past Dwayne, but he caught her and held her back. "Let him work," he said firmly. John laid Layla on the concrete, already starting chest compressions. "Come on, kid. Come on." Dwayne crouched next to them, watching her chest, waiting for a sign. Finally, Layla coughed, water spewing from her mouth. She gasped, trembling. Relief washed over the crowd like a wave, but the moment of triumph was short-lived. John's eyes flicked up to Travis, who stood unmoved, still smirking. "She made it," Travis called out loudly. "See? She was fine." The words hit John like a punch. He rose slowly, towering over the lifeguard. The crowd murmured, some pulling out phones. Layla's mother cradled her daughter, sobbing. Dwayne stood, his eyes never leaving Travis. "We saw what you did," John growled. Travis shrugged. "She said she could swim." "That doesn't give you the right to test her," Dwayne snapped. A silence fell over the pool area. The heat, the noise, the laughter, all gone. John clenched his fists, his muscles rippling. Dwayne took a slow step forward. Around them, the crowd began to understand what had just happened. And for the first time, the tide started to turn. The moment wasn't over. It was just beginning. Silence gripped the crowd as the reality of what had just happened settled heavily over the water park. The only sounds were the gasps of onlookers and the quiet sobs of Layla's mother as she held her trembling daughter close. Layla's small frame shivered, not from the water but from the lingering terror of almost drowning. Dwayne stood close, his large hand resting protectively on Layla's mother's shoulder, while John remained locked on Travis, his jaw clenched tight. Travis finally broke the silence with a scoff, his arms still arrogantly crossed over his chest. "What's everyone looking at? She said she could swim. I just let her prove it." His words carried across the pool, drawing uneasy glances and hushed whispers from the bystanders. A few people exchanged nervous looks, their phones now lowered as they struggled with the guilt of having done nothing. Layla's mother wiped her tears, her voice cracking as she tried to speak. You just stood there," she whispered. "You watched her sink." Travis shrugged, not even trying to mask his indifference. "It's not my job to babysit kids who overestimate themselves. Maybe next time she'll know her place." The casual cruelty of his words sent a fresh wave of outrage rippling through the crowd, but still no one dared step forward. John Cena took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling heavily. He glanced at Dwayne, who gave him the smallest nod. "Stay with them," John murmured before turning and stalking toward Travis. As John closed the distance, Travis's smirk faltered slightly, but he held his ground. "What? You think you're going to do something tough, guy? She's fine. You should be thanking me for making her stronger." John's voice was low, dangerous. "You humiliated a child. You put her life at risk. And now you think you're the hero?" Before Travis could answer, a voice called out from the crowd. "I got the whole thing on video." Heads turned as a young man in a blue rash guard stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he held up his phone. "I was recording when it started. I got everything, the way you took her float, the way you taunted her, and how you just stood there when she went under." Travis's eyes snapped to the kid, his expression shifting from smugness to barely concealed panic. "You better watch what you're saying, kid," he growled. John didn't move, his gaze fixed coldly on Travis. "Say that again," he dared. Travis's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Play it," John ordered the young man without taking his eyes off Travis. The kid nodded and tapped his screen. The video began to play, the sound of Layla's voice clear and high-pitched, demanding her float back. Then Travis's taunts, his cruel laughter, and finally the moment he threw the float into the deep end. The crowd watched in grim silence as the video showed Layla stepping toward the pool, her determination clear. Travis's face was perfectly visible as he stood back, allowing her to jump without lifting a finger to stop her. Gasps spread like wildfire through the gathering crowd as the reality of what they'd all witnessed hit them again. But now it was undeniable, recorded proof of Travis's deliberate cruelty. "That's attempted murder," someone shouted from the back. "You pushed her to do it. You could have stopped her," another voice rang out. Travis took a shaky step back, his bravado crumbling. "It's not what it looks like. She was just mouthing off. She needed to be taught a lesson." John took a step closer, towering over the now visibly shaken lifeguard. "And you thought it was your job to teach that lesson by letting her drown?" Before Travis could answer, a new voice interrupted, sharp and authoritative. "What the hell is going on here?" A man in a polo shirt with the park's logo appeared, flanked by 2 security guards. His name tag read Daniel Moore, Park Director. John turned slightly, gesturing toward Travis. "Ask him, and ask everyone here to show you their footage. You're going to want to see it." Moore's brow furrowed as he glanced at the crowd. "Show me." The young man with the video stepped forward, replaying the footage. Moore's face darkened as he watched the scene unfold. By the time the video ended, Moore was shaken with anger. "Travis Hunter, you're done. Effective immediately." "You can't fire me over this," Travis burst out. "It's one stupid kid." Layla's mother let out a choked sob at those words, and Dwayne barely held back his fury. Moore's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I just did. Pack your things. Security will escort you out. You're banned from this park permanently." Travis looked around, searching for support, but there was none. Even the lifeguards who had stood nearby shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. "This isn't over," Travis spat, but the words fell flat. John Cena stepped forward once more, his voice low and calm. "Yeah, it is." Travis's eyes darted between John and Dwayne one last time before he turned and stormed off, soaked, humiliated, and defeated. As he disappeared, a strange quiet settled over the area. The crowd seemed to collectively exhale, relief mingling with the lingering shame of their earlier inaction. Layla's mother hugged her daughter tightly, whispering soothing words through her tears. Layla clung to her, her body still trembling. John and Dwayne stood together, watching the scene unfold. After a moment, Dwayne spoke quietly. "It shouldn't have taken this long. Somebody should have stopped it before it got this far." John nodded, his gaze distant. "But they didn't. And next time, someone else might not be so lucky." Moore approached them both, his expression heavy with guilt. "I should have seen it. There were complaints before. I just never had proof." "You have it now," Dwayne said flatly. Moore nodded slowly. "Yeah, and it won't happen again. I promise you that." John looked back at Layla, who was still clinging to her mother. What happens to her now matters more than what happens to him. Moore followed his gaze and sighed. "I'll cover any counseling she needs, whatever it takes." John nodded once but said nothing more. The damage was done. The only thing left was to help the girl heal. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmurs of anger and disbelief trailing behind them. A few people lingered, watching Layla with pity, but no one approached. Dwayne and John stood there a moment longer, the weight of the day settling heavily on their shoulders. Finally, Dwayne spoke. "Let's get her out of here." John nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, let's." The atmosphere remained heavy even after Travis was escorted away. Layla sat on the edge of the pool, wrapped in her mother's arms, her eyes distant and unfocused. Her small body trembled as if the cold water still clung to her skin, but it wasn't the water causing her to shiver. It was the memory of sinking, of the suffocating silence under the surface, and the terrifying realization that no one was coming to help until it was almost too late. John Cena watched her closely, his heart twisting at the sight. He had seen fear before, he had felt it himself, but there was something about seeing it consume a child that made his fists clench in helpless frustration. Dwayne crouched beside Layla's mother, his massive frame blocking the view of onlookers still lingering nearby. "Is she hurt?" he asked gently. Layla's mother shook her head quickly, wiping her tears. "Just scared," she whispered. "I think she hit her head when she went under, but I don't know." John joined them, his gaze serious. "We need to get her checked out. Head injuries can be tricky." The mother nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Daniel Moore, the park director, returned with a strained expression. "An ambulance is on the way, just in case," he added quickly. "I'm so sorry. Truly, this never should have happened." John's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Dwayne spoke instead, his voice low but firm. "Sorry, won't fix this. That man was your employee. People warned you." Moore looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I know. There were complaints, but nothing solid. People get upset at lifeguards all the time. I didn't I didn't think it was this bad." His voice broke slightly. John finally spoke, his tone cold. "You didn't want to see it. That's what happened." Before Moore could respond, the young man with the video approached cautiously. "I sent the footage to your email, and I saved a copy, just in case." His voice wavered, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. Moore nodded. "Thank you. You did the right thing." The boy hesitated, then looked at John. "I wanted to stop him. I did, but I froze. I didn't know what to do." John placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You did more than most. You spoke up. That matters." The boy nodded quickly, blinking back tears. I couldn't believe no one else was saying anything." "People are scared," Dwayne said quietly. "Scared of getting involved. Scared of being wrong. So they stay silent. But silence, it costs lives." The words hung in the air heavier than the sun above them. Moore cleared his throat. "The police will want statements. I'll make sure everyone stays until they arrive." John nodded. "Good. This doesn't get buried, not this time." Layla stirred slightly, her small voice breaking the tense silence. "I don't want to swim anymore." Her mother gasped softly, squeezing her tighter. "Sweetheart, no, I mean it," Layla whispered. "I'm done." John felt the words hit like a punch. He looked at Dwayne, who shared the same grim expression. Dwayne spoke softly. "I get it, kid, I do. But don't make that choice today, not while you're scared." Layla shook her head stubbornly. "I almost died because of him." John crouched so he was eye level with her. "You're right. Because of him. Not because of the water. Not because of swimming. Because a man abused his power. Don't let him take more from you." Layla looked away, her face crumbling as fresh tears fell. "I don't care. I'm not going back in." Her mother sobbed quietly, burying her face in Layla's hair. John sighed heavily, running a hand down his face. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, let's just make sure you're okay." The sound of sirens in the distance made Layla flinch. Dwayne stood, waving down the paramedics as they arrived. He turned to Moore. "You tell them everything. You make sure they understand exactly what happened." "I will," Moore promised, "and I'll make a public apology, whatever it takes." John scoffed. "Save your apologies. Just fix your damn park." The paramedics approached, carefully checking Layla for injuries. She barely responded, her eyes glazed as they worked. After a few minutes, one of them looked up. "No signs of concussion, but she's in shock. You should take her to the hospital just to be safe." Layla's mother nodded, whispering a shaky thank you. Dwayne stepped back, his arms crossed as he watched the scene. John stood beside him, silent. "How many more like him do you think are out there?" John asked finally. "Too many," Dwayne replied, "and not enough people willing to stop them." John glanced at the crowd, most of whom had begun to disperse once the immediate danger was over. A few still lingered, whispering, their eyes darting away when they met his gaze. "We let it happen," John muttered. "All of us." Dwayne nodded slowly. "That's what makes it worse." They fell silent again, watching as Layla was loaded onto a stretcher, her mother never letting go of her hand. As the paramedics wheeled her away, John and Dwayne followed slowly, their faces grim. Moore approached once more, his face pale. "I know this won't fix anything, but thank you for stepping in." John turned slowly, his eyes hard. "Don't thank us. Just ask yourself what you would have done if we weren't here." Moore swallowed hard but said nothing. The police arrived shortly after, taking statements from everyone involved. The young man with the video gave his account, his voice trembling but steady. Layla's mother spoke through tears, her hands shaking. John and Dwayne told their side, their words clipped and precise. It was over quickly. Too quickly. As the sun began to set, John and Dwayne stood side by side, watching the ambulance disappear down the road. The park felt quieter now, emptier somehow. "She's not done," Dwayne said finally. John glanced at him. "No?" Dwayne shook his head. "Kids are stronger than we think. She'll come back. One day." John nodded slowly. "Yeah, but not today." They turned away together, leaving behind a park that would never feel quite the same again. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the water park as the crowd finally started to thin. The incident left a stain on the air, something that no amount of summer laughter or sunshine could fully erase. Layla sat quietly on the bench, bundled in a towel, her small hands gripping the edges as if the thin fabric could shield her from the world. Her mother hovered close, eyes still red from crying, but trying her best to appear strong for her daughter. John Cena and Dwayne Johnson stood nearby, silent sentries watching over them. Daniel Moore returned after speaking with the police officers, his expression grim. "They're taking the video footage and statements. They said it's enough to open an investigation. Travis won't be working anywhere near a pool again," he assured. Neither John nor Dwayne responded immediately. Moore shifted uncomfortably. "I'm going to make a public statement. I should have acted on the complaints before. I know that now." "You should have," Dwayne said flatly, his voice low but laced with barely contained anger. "But this isn't just about firing him or making a statement. It's about making sure this never happens again. You've got people working here who think they can get away with treating kids like garbage." Moore nodded quickly. "I know. I swear to you, there will be retraining, background checks, everything." John finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You ever wonder why no one stepped in sooner? Why a whole crowd stood there and watched while that girl nearly drowned?" Moore swallowed hard but didn't answer. John continued, "It's because everyone is so damn used to looking the other way. People are scared of being wrong, scared of standing out, scared of doing the right thing." Dwayne crossed his arms, his eyes cold. "And people like Travis count on that. They know most folks won't do a damn thing. That's how they get away with it." Moore wiped his face, clearly shaken. I let him work here. I let this happen." John stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Yeah, you did. But you're owning it now. That's the only reason I'm still standing here talking to you." Moore let out a shaky breath. "What can I do to fix this?" Dwayne glanced at Layla, then back at Moore. "You make this right for her. Counseling, medical care, whatever she needs. And you make sure your park is safe, not just fun." "I'll do it," Moore promised. The sound of the water park carried on faintly around them, but the heart of the place felt hollow. Families had returned to their fun, children screaming down slides, lifeguards back in their chairs, but something had shifted. There were more eyes watching now, more parents holding their kids close. Layla hadn't spoken since her outburst about quitting swimming. Her mother tried to coax words from her, but the little girl simply stared at the ground, lips pressed tight together. Finally, John crouched beside her, his voice soft. "Layla, can I tell you a secret?" She glanced at him hesitantly, but gave the slightest nod. "When I was a kid, I nearly drowned too," John began. "I thought I was done with water forever. Told my dad I'd never swim again. You know what he told me?" Layla shook her head slowly. He said, "Fear's like a bully. If you let it win once, it'll keep taking things from you. First swimming, then other stuff. Until one day, you don't recognize yourself anymore." Layla's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she didn't look away. "But I am scared." John nodded. "So was I. Brave doesn't mean not being scared. Brave means doing it anyway." Dwayne stepped forward, kneeling on Layla's other side. "He's right, and you've already done the bravest thing. You survived. You didn't let that man take everything from you." Layla sniffled, wiping her face. "I hate him." "Good," Dwayne said. "Hate what he did. But don't let him live in your head rent-free, all right? Don't let him take swimming away from you, too." Her mother's voice trembled. "You don't have to do anything right now, baby, but I just want you to know you're not alone." Layla's small hands clenched tighter around the towel. "I want to try, but I'm scared." John smiled softly. "That's okay. You don't have to do it today, but when you're ready, we'll be right here." Layla hesitated, then whispered, Will you stay until I try?" "Yeah," Dwayne answered instantly. "We're not going anywhere." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange. Layla sat quietly, staring at the water, her mind racing. Around her, life continued. Kids played, parents laughed, but she stayed still, caught in a battle no one else could see. Minutes passed, maybe longer, before she finally shifted. Slowly, painfully, she stood, her legs shaky. Her mother gasped but stayed silent. John and Dwayne both stood back, giving her space. Layla took a step forward, then another. She stopped at the edge of the pool, staring down at the water that had so nearly taken her life. She trembled, her breath hitching. "You don't have to," her mother whispered desperately, but Layla shook her head. "I do," she whispered. John felt his throat tighten as he watched the small girl confront the monster in her mind. She knelt, reaching out slowly, and touched the surface of the water. The ripples spread, gentle and soft, but the act was monumental. Dwayne smiled faintly. "There you go, kid. That's it." Layla stayed there, hand resting on the water, breathing hard. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "You're supposed to be," John said gently, "but you didn't let it stop you." She stayed like that a moment longer before standing and turning back. She didn't smile, but there was something in her eyes, something new, a spark, a hint of the fire she had shown before it had been almost extinguished. Dwayne gave her a nod of approval. "Whenever you're ready to swim again, you call us." Layla nodded slowly. "Okay." Her mother sobbed quietly, wrapping her arms around her daughter. John and Dwayne stood back, watching, both men silently exchanging a glance of understanding. Daniel Moore approached one last time. "We'll do better," he promised. John nodded. "See that you do." They stood there for a long moment, watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon. The worst was over, but the memory would linger, shaping every decision that park made from that day forward. And in the center of it all stood one small girl who had stared fear in the face and reached out anyway. The sky had darkened into soft twilight by the time the park grew quiet again. Families had packed their things and drifted away, the echoes of laughter fading into the distance. Lights flickered on around the pool, casting shimmering reflections across the water's surface. Layla sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her mother's arms wrapped tightly around her. John Cena and Dwayne Johnson stood nearby, their gazes steady, neither of them ready to leave until they knew she was truly safe. The ambulance had long since gone, the police too, but the weight of what happened still lingered heavily in the air. Layla hadn't said another word since touching the water. Her breathing had calmed, but her eyes remained distant, lost somewhere deep in thought. Her mother wiped away the last of her tears and whispered softly, "You were so brave today, baby. I'm so proud of you." Layla didn't respond, but she leaned a little into her mother's embrace, and that was enough for now. John crouched down in front of them, his face softening as he looked at Layla. "You know, you're the bravest person I've met in a long time," he said, "not because you touched the water, but because you faced him, because you stood your ground, even when it was scary." Layla blinked slowly, glancing at him. "I didn't feel brave." "Brave isn't a feeling," John said. "It's what you do, even when you're scared. You did that. You survived him." Dwayne knelt beside them, adding quietly, "And you're not done. You're going to decide what happens next, not him, not anyone else. You." Layla's mother sniffled, nodding as she kissed the top of her daughter's head. "That's right. We don't let people like him decide our future." For the first time, Layla's lips trembled in something close to a smile. "I still don't want to swim," she whispered. "That's okay," John answered quickly. "You don't have to. Not until you're ready. And if that day never comes, that's fine too. But I don't think that's how your story ends." Layla looked at him curiously. "How do you know?" John smiled. "Because you already took the hardest step. You looked at the thing that scared you most, and you didn't run away." Dwayne nodded in agreement. "You reached out to it. You didn't let it own you. That's more than most adults would have done." Layla's gaze dropped back to the water, watching it ripple under the pool lights. She was quiet for a long time before she spoke again. "Will it always feel this scary?" Dwayne exhaled slowly. "No, not always. The first time's the worst. After that, it gets easier. You'll remember that you're stronger than it." Layla nodded slowly, but said nothing more. Her mother stroked her hair gently. "We should get you home, sweetheart. You need to rest." Before they could move, Daniel Moore approached one last time, his face somber but sincere. "I meant what I said. I'll make this right. I spoke with the officers. There's going to be a full investigation, and I'll personally oversee new training for every lifeguard here." John stood, his expression serious. "You make sure you do, because if we hear anything like this happening again, you won't see us coming, but you'll feel it." Moore swallowed hard and nodded. "Understood." Dwayne added, "And if you really want to fix this, set up free swimming lessons for kids like her. Give them confidence. Make sure no other kid feels like they don't belong in a pool." Moore blinked, clearly not having considered that. Yes, that's a good idea. I'll make it happen." John gave a small nod of approval before turning back to Layla. "See? Change is already happening because of you." Layla glanced up at him, a flicker of pride flashing in her eyes. "Because of us," she corrected softly. John's grin widened. "Fair enough." Dwayne reached out, gently squeezing Layla's shoulder. "You remember this, kid. You're tougher than most people twice your size." Her mother stood, gathering the towel tighter around Layla. "Thank you, both of you. I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." "You don't have to thank us," John said. "We just did what anyone should have done." Dwayne's jaw tightened as he added, "But they didn't." Most of them stood there and watched. Don't ever forget that, Layla. Some people will freeze. Some will look away. But there will always be someone who steps up. You look for those people. You be one of those people. Layla nodded seriously, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. "I will." Her mother sniffled again, pulling Layla close. "Come on, baby, let's go home." John and Dwayne watched as they walked away slowly, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. For a while, neither man spoke. They just stood there, listening to the faint sounds of water lapping against the pool's edge. Finally, John broke the silence. "You think she'll be okay?" Dwayne nodded slowly. "Yeah, she will. Might take time, but she's got heart, more than most." John let out a soft chuckle. "She's got more guts than some guys I've met in the ring." They stood together, watching the last of the sunlight fade away, leaving the park in a quiet hush. It wasn't victory they felt, not really. Travis might have been removed, but the damage was done. Still, there was a sense of something else, something harder to define. A small spark that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't beyond saving. John exhaled deeply. "You know, Dee, it's not always about throwing punches. Sometimes the hardest fights are the ones where you just stand your ground." Dwayne smiled faintly. "Yeah, and sometimes the real victory is making sure someone else stands up too." They exchanged a look of mutual respect, then slowly turned and walked away, leaving behind the empty pool and the quiet echoes of a battle fought without fists, but won with courage. Some fights didn't need a ring. Some fights happened in the real world. And today they had made damn sure that justice had a voice. What do you think about this story? Would you have stepped in or stayed silent? Let us know in the comments. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories.